16 for Bernie Sanders, senior advisor to both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and now one-third of the trio that makes up MSNBC's new show, The Weekend, which airs 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Saturdays and Sundays. Simone Sanders Townsend, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to chat with you, live from my office.
So we are now days away from the New Hampshire primary. There are two outcomes here. Basically, Nikki Haley wins or she comes in second to Donald Trump. In both of those scenarios, what does it mean for Trump? Like, give us the explainer on what to look out for here.
Well, yeah, I would say there's two scenarios. Well, maybe three, actually. She wins. She comes in a very close second, like within 10, let's just say maybe even 15 points, which under no other circumstances.
Sign of the times that a close second is 15 points away.
Right? No other circumstances would 15 points even be close. It would be a blowout. But like 15, I would say 10 is legitimately close, but 15 they might give it to her. Or the third scenario is the numbers hold in all of the polling that we've seen, and from the anecdotes that we've seen coming out, and Donald Trump, it's a blowout. She's a very distant second. And I think in the last scenario, the primary is essentially over. And Nikki Haley has nowhere else to go. She's not participating in the Nevada state party-run caucuses. And that's an important point because that is the way in which delegates will be allocated. She'll be on the primary ballot in Nevada. Well, can't get delegates off the primary ballot. And then in South Carolina, where she was the governor, Donald Trump is poised to beat her there. And I just want to give folks a little history and some data. There have only been two presidents in our modern history who have lost their home state in a general election and went on to be the president. Donald Trump is one of them, New York, and Richard Nixon is the other, California. There has never been a nominee for either party, Democrat or Republican, that has lost their home state in a primary and gone on to be the nominee. So the math is not mathing for the former governor if the third scenario holds. If the second scenario holds and she comes in a close second, then there is viability. And I say that because that means that people within the Republican Party apparatus, in the primary, okay, are going to start taking a look and say, oh, well, maybe Nikki Haley is actually competitive, not just performatively or proverbially competitive, right? Maybe there is someone that can compete with Donald Trump. There are MAGA voters, Brian, we talk about them all the time. MAGA voters are about 35, maybe 40% of the Republican Party electorate. That still leaves 65% of voters out there. Where she wins, then really it really kicks into gear. I don't think the first scenario is more likely. I think that we are really looking at a scenario where it could potentially be over in New Hampshire, over in this primary come Tuesday, because I just don't think the Haley campaign has understood New Hampshire and the state and frankly what the voters across the board are looking for. Voters want somebody that inspires them in some way, shape, or form. Whatever you feel about any past Republican Party nominee or Democratic Party nominee, someone has felt they were inspirational somewhere in some way, shape, or form, because people have felt like moved that this is the person that could change the game for me and my life and my family. You have to give people something. You have to give them that, and Nikki Haley is giving pundit.
My audience is largely Democratic. For Democrats out there, the ideal situation is that this primary drags on, that Trump is forced to spend time and money fighting other Republicans as opposed to being able to pivot to the general. How would that happen? Like, what makes it most likely that this primary does continue to drag on?
You need the second scenario. The second scenario where the former governor of South Carolina comes in a close second to Donald Trump, for whatever reason, right? People are saying that a number of Democrats may come out and cast ballots for Nikki Haley in the Republican primary because they can do that in New Hampshire. Whatever needs to happen, Nikki Haley has to be competitive in order for this to drag on. There is a path, a chance. I used to work for Senator Sanders. They used to always say there is a path. The path is narrow, but there is a path. There is a path, and the path is narrow. But I think the more likely scenario is that the former president, Donald Trump, is actually spending his time and what little talents he may have between now and the summer, the Republican National Convention, in court. And we already saw him leave Iowa, and instead of flying straight to New Hampshire, which is what candidates usually do after Iowa, win, lose, or draw, he flew to New York because he was in court for a civil case, E. Jean Carroll, a defamation case where E. Jean Carroll is seeking a woman that a jury has already found that they found him liable for rape and libel against her. And E. Jean Carroll is seeking more money in a civil case because Donald Trump won't stop defaming her and telling lies about her. There are more court cases. There's Jack Smith's case, the Judge Tanya Chutkan. She is the judge presiding over that case. It's slated for March to start early March. It may set back a little bit, but these are things that are going to happen. So I think the more likely scenario is that Donald Trump, I think the courtroom has become a part of the campaign for him. And this is a year where our legal and our political are not just parallel, they are very much so intertwined in a way for a presidential campaign that they have not been in a very long time. And actually never, because we never had a president we never had a former president of the United States of America who was twice impeached, right? Run for re-election, who is currently facing 91 indictments and 4 criminal charges, one of which for his participation in a attempted coup because he lost an election. It sounds like a plot out of the craziest movie on Tubi I have ever not seen, but it is actually real life.
We would see this and we would say the writer's room has jumped the shark, but here we are. Simone, how worrisome do you think it is that Donald Trump, who is the purported second coming of Christ in the Republican base, only got 50% of the primary vote in ruby red Iowa? Like, is this a harbinger of a fractured coalition on the right, or is this, just totally normal and we'll see the inevitable reversion to the mean in the end?
If these were the Democrats, I would have seen a lot of headlines on Wednesday that would have said Democrat, on Tuesday that said Democrats in disarray.
Oh, of course.
Fractured Dem party.
Simone, we see those headlines regardless. You don't need anything to happen for those headlines to happen. That's the default.
I mean, I can't say enough, it's insane. But I think people should know 2 things. One, the last time the Republican Party had a competitive primary process was in 2016. And Donald Trump, he lost the Iowa caucuses that time. But in 2016, 180,000 voters came out to vote in the Iowa caucuses. That was a low number. This year, 110,000 voters came out to vote in the Iowa caucuses. So a substantial, that's a 70,000 people drop off from 2016. And of those people that came out, these are the most activist of activist supporters. Only less than 5% of the voters in the entrance polls, because in Iowa, in the caucuses, you have entrance polls, not exit polls in the Republican caucus, in the Republican caucuses. In the entrance polls, less than 5%, I think it was something like 3% identified as independents or not conservatives, right? So this is a ruby red. The people that came out were the most activist Republicans. One could argue the MAGA supporters. It's why the majority of people who were polled in the interest polls said that they did not believe that Joe Biden actually won the 2020 election, right? That's a conspiracy theory. Obviously he did. Obviously he's the sitting president right now. Kamala Harris is the vice president. But the people that believe that are also the people that believe that, Trump is the best thing since sliced bread. So I say that to say that Iowa is not, I don't think it's the barometer for any elect, Republican or Democrat, Republican or Democrat. I really think that in the primary process, you have to take the first 4 states as a whole, right? They're each important pieces to a larger pie. And the difference one of the biggest differences between Iowa and New Hampshire is independence. There's a substantial amount of independence in New Hampshire. The New Hampshire electorate is older. The Iowa electorate is more conservative. There are more white evangelical Christians, which is a very particular subset of a faith-based group. So in Iowa, as opposed to New Hampshire, 1 in 5 residents in New Hampshire is over the age of 65. So to me, that said, conversations about Social Security and Medicare, they are quite important. And the candidates who are talking about raising the retirement age are not necessarily speaking to the breadth and depth of the electorate. Wink, wink, Nikki Haley. So I think that Nevada is important. I think that South Carolina is important. And then again, Super Tuesday is where the majority of delegates are awarded. If there were a competitive and active Democratic primary process, Super Tuesday would also be very important. But I would tell you the same thing, that you have to take the first 4 states as a whole. The problem here is we're not going to get to Nevada and South Carolina being relevant because none of the candidates in this Republican primary outside of Chris Christie, and I would also, former Governor Chris Christie and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, demonstrated that they were willing to compete with Donald Trump, willing to attack him. You do not win a race without being willing to compete. It is a competition. And the lack of competition here is why we're seeing what we're seeing. You get what you vote for, and that's democracy.
Well, Joe Biden's polling right now is sagging. I'm very much of the mind that the hysterics about Joe Biden and the natural are the natural inclination of a media ecosystem that kind of needs some drama of a close race or an imminent Trump victory. You were on the campaign side for a long time. What would you say about Biden's standing right now, 11 months out, given your past experience?
I would say that one, it is early, but two, not too early to pay attention. And I say that to say that the polling needs to be taken with a grain of salt right now, especially if we are talking about drilled down polls like battleground state polling 11 months out from an election. That is, polls are a snapshot in time about how voters feel. And I think that the polling is throughout the summer is more indicative about how voters really feel in the lead up to November 2024. Really, frankly, people need to be looking towards late September, October, because of early voting in many of these battleground states. That's why that summer polling, that last August poll, is very important right before Labor Day. But I think that people should still they should be concerned. It's not too early to be a little concerned, to pay attention. And I say that to say the numbers around as it relates to younger voters, the numbers as it relates to Black voters, particularly Black women and Black men, Latino voters, particularly Latino men, they are, it's a warning sign. It's like a yellow light. It's like, hey, all right, you come around that bench, you might need to slow down a little bit, take a look, because there's still time to fix. And I saw the Vice President Harris on The View this week, and she talked about her travels as she's going around the country talking to people, which I think that is a very important thing for the Biden-Harris campaign apparatus, separate from the Biden campaign White House, from the Biden-Harris White House, but the Biden-Harris campaign apparatus is very important because she's going out of the bubble to hear from people. And one of the things she also gave in that interview was I think a very nuanced, but I hear you and we are listening answer when it came to the question of the toll that the Israel-Hamas war conflict is taking on the Palestinian people. And I said people who live in the Gaza Strip, who have nowhere to go, who have just been, their homes have been decimated. And she was asked about young people's reservations about and concerns about the Biden administration and voting for Joe Biden again because of that. And she gave a good answer. And frankly, I think that is what it is going to take. You're going to have to hear from people, hear their concerns, and then you have to be responsive to them. And that's what works in campaigns. It really does.
But we're in a moment right now where everything in the political space is hyper polarized. Mm-hmm. How would you suggest from your past experience they break through where it feels to a lot of us like anything that's actually said doesn't matter because everybody's already retreated into their camps?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, right, don't you kind of feel like that's a function of, first of all, we are all way too online, right? Like, Twitter is not real life. I love it. It's not real life. Only a fraction, especially now, given with the site formerly known as Twitter, especially now, given how it is being run, a fraction of the American people are on that website. A fraction of folks are on Instagram. A fraction of folks are on Facebook. And so if we are making political if campaigns are making political decisions, living and dying by, what's in the comments.
Yeah,
that's not a place you ever want to be. You gotta be responsive to the people. That is why traveling, getting out there, hearing from folks, town halls, it matters. And in my experience, from the time that I work campaigns, there's always a stark disconnect. Always a stark disconnect in what I would read on the national papers, on the front pages of the national papers, and what the local papers would say. What sometimes the conversations would be on cable news and what the local news is saying. What the people are saying on the internet and what the people in the diners or in the barbershops or, the folks at that town hall are saying and thinking. And that is the barometer here. And I think that the majority of the American people, I know folks like to say the majority of people are in the middle. No, I think the majority of people have real clear thoughts about what they believe. I don't actually believe the majority of people are in the middle, but I do believe the majority of people, they just want to be able to make enough food to make enough money to put food on their table. You know, the majority of people are like, well, who's going to do something about the fact that I don't have, if I live in prior to the American Rescue Plan, if I lived in Tar Heel, North Carolina, we were all using dial-up internet. Okay, but thanks to the American Rescue Plan and Governor Roy Cooper and Joe Biden, now they've laid fiber optic cables and we don't have dial-up anymore. Why does that matter? Because maybe I want to stream church. Maybe because I live in a rural area. Maybe I want my grandkids to be able to come over and do their homework. Maybe there are all of these things. Maybe I want to be able to have a telemedicine appointment because the nearest hospital is a 45-minute drive away and I can't get an appointment. There are all of these real things. And by the way, the story I just told is real. Joe Biden told that story when he was in North Carolina this week, right? So I think that it is more about, you have to speak directly to the heart of what people care about. And people care about being able to get, affordable internet connection in their community. People care about, not having a random politician in a state capitol that they haven't been to tell them what to do with their bodies, and try to overrule their doctor. People care about freedoms. I don't know about you, but I care about not living under a president that's a dictator. So I think we have to get to a space and place, frankly, in our country where we can just have real conversation. I think far too many people we are reinforcing only tuning into what it is that we think we like. And there's literally buttons all over whatever social media site you want where you could self-select out things that you don't agree with and people and positions you don't like. And what I do like about what we are able to do on the weekend on our show is we are three, people with very diverse backgrounds, but also diverse ideology. And so sometimes I'm sitting at the table and Michael Steele, former chairman of the RNC, is saying something that I'm like, I don't know, but okay. That I wouldn't have heard otherwise if Michael Steele wasn't sitting there talking to me. Sometimes I say something the same and Alicia's like, boom, well. So this is I think that we are frankly indicative of the kind of conversations that are actually happening across the country. And yeah, that's what campaigns and I think leadership needs to be responsive to, not the loudest voices that are often the minority, but rather the majority of opinion out there.
Right, the ones loud enough to break through, but that don't actually represent the vast majority or any semblance of a majority of people. By the way, to your point on what's being offered to Americans, that dichotomy was put on display perfectly just this past week when Donald Trump came on stage during one of his rallies or something, and he was warning about the dangers of banks being able to debank people, and he kept going on and on about debanking people, which is, for somebody who has the best words, is a nonsensical word. But
hires the best people.
Hiring the best people, of course. But it was in response to this story about how banks are targeting conservative influencers and how Enrique Tarrio, for example, the leader of the Proud Boys, was lost his account at like J.P. Morgan or something like that. And so Donald Trump came out on stage with his list of grievances, including protecting the leaders of far-right extremist groups from having their bank accounts taken away. That's what his priority is, on stage in the immediate lead up to the New Hampshire primary. And meanwhile, you look at what Joe Biden just did this week with regard to banking, and that was to unveil a proposal to lower overdraft fees from $35 down to $3. If you are the leader of a far-right extremist group, Donald Trump does seem to be your guy. Like, he's out there on the campaign trail advocating for you if you lead a far-right extremist group who wants your bank account protected. But if you're one of the people who falls into the other bucket of not being leaders of far-right extremist groups, and you don't want overdraft fees to exceed, forget about $35, but $3, then that seems like a much better option. And so I think those two things being put on display on the same week in the same topic really does kind of present the difference that we're looking at as we move toward November.
I agree. Brian, can I just say, this is why I love all the things that you do, because you put the things out there. And I think that as I think the media apparatus as a whole, as folks are still working